Good morning, everyone. Thanks for getting here. Some of you are here remarkably early, which speaks well of your diligence, perhaps of your enthusiasm for our event today. This being Washington, we're going to have people trickle in and out throughout the day, but we certainly won't delay getting started because we certainly have a quorum here. I'm Bob Hathaway. I run the Asia program here at the Wilson Center. This is being webcast around the country and indeed around the world, including in Pakistan. So if you'll permit me to say just a word of introduction about the Wilson Center, even though I expect most of you here in this room already know these things. The Wilson Center is an independent, nonpartisan institute for advanced research. We were created in 1968 by the U.S. Congress. We are the nation's memorial to President Woodrow Wilson, in the same way that you have the Lincoln Memorial or the Washington Monument on the Mall. It's a couple blocks from here. Well, we're a living institution, but we're also the nation's memorial to Woodrow Wilson. Wilson, by the way, was the only president who had a PhD. We seek to promote research, writing, dialogue on vital current issues, as well as their historical and cultural background. We bring about 150 visiting scholars each year from around the world to the Wilson Center to free them up from their regular jobs, give them an opportunity to research and write. It's an extraordinary list of the books that are produced here every year. We organize more than 700 events, such as this conference. And we see ourselves as trying to provide a bridge between the policy world, which of course dominates so much of this town, and the world of the scholar. In essence, we seek to commemorate Woodrow Wilson's two passions, public policy and sound scholarship. Several years ago, the Wilson Center made a decision to dramatically expand the attention it devotes to Pakistan. One indication of that heightened interest is the appointment on an annual basis of a Pakistan scholar who is selected through a rigorous competition and then spends 8 or 9 or 10 months here working on a book. Riaz Khan, who you will meet shortly, is our current Pakistan scholar. We will be making, almost certainly within days, an announcement about next year's Pakistan scholar. Our conference today is another example of what we're trying to do to heighten informed discussion and debate in Washington about Pakistan. Today's conference follows a similar event last November where we focused on Pakistan's water sector. That conference was preceded by conferences on Pakistan's energy sector, on trade, on education. Each of these conferences results in the publication of a substantial report, copies of which, at least several couple conference reports, were on the table immediately outside the door. If you didn't pick one up on your way in, I certainly invite you to pick one up as you leave this room later today. Today, and in the conference report that will be produced in the coming weeks, we intend to focus on a range of issues having to do with food security and food insecurity in Pakistan. As, of course, all of you in this room understand, Pakistan, like many of its neighbors, both in South Asia and beyond, faces significant challenges in providing adequate nutrition for its people. According to the World Food Program, 95 of Pakistan's 121 districts confront the hunger and disease which is usually associated with food insecurity. I think latest statistics suggest that 77 million Pakistanis fail to receive the minimum number of calories that are recommended for daily consumption. Perhaps even more alarmingly, this figure has climbed by 17 million in just the past 2 years. So there's no question but that food insecurity is a large and a growing problem in Pakistan. These types of statistics raise some troubling questions about Pakistan's future. Is food security in Pakistan in the process of creating a new class of poor? Will hunger become a recruitment agent for individuals and groups promoting violence and extremism? Can food security threaten the viability of the Pakistani state? We have enlisted some of the best people in the world to discuss these and other issues with us today. And like you, I look forward to getting a lot smarter about these issues during the course of the day. Before we turn to our first speaker, I need to make a few administrative announcements. The first one is by now an announcement you're tired of hearing, and yet I'm going to make it again. Please cut off your cell phones, your pagers, your iPods, your BlackBerries, anything that is going to either disturb our proceedings or, equally important, play havoc with the webcast, because all of these bits of equipment really mess up our webcast. We will be meeting here until lunchtime. At lunchtime, we'll then move to another room and have lunch, and then continue our afternoon proceedings in another room. You'll be hearing an announcement about that a little bit later in the morning. Restrooms are immediately outside the door and down the hall, the end of the hall here. And lastly, we will, at several points during the day, have opportunities to get you involved in the proceedings. And I would simply request that you wait until we get a microphone to you, that you introduce yourself, and that you keep your comments or your questions as brief as possible. One last point before we get started, and that is simply to say that putting on a conference of this sort produces many debts and many obligations, and I want to thank a number of people. First, and probably most important, our speakers. Many of them have come a considerable distance. Some of them have come literally halfway around the world at considerable personal inconvenience. You would not have been here today were it not for them, and so I want to thank all of our speakers. Second, to those in Pakistan and the United States and elsewhere who have demonstrated their confidence in the Wilson Center and its Pakistan program by the very tangible means of supporting us financially. And in this regard, I would like specifically to mention the Fellowship Fund for Pakistan, which is a Karachi-based charitable trust whose support has been absolutely essential, not only for this conference, but for many of our Pakistan-related activities. Third, while the Pakistan program, the Asia program, is the principal sponsor of this, we've been ably assisted by a number of our sister programs here at the Wilson Center, and I'd like to thank the Comparative Urban Studies Project, the Environmental Change and Security Program, and the Project on Science, Technology, America, and the Global Economy. Colleagues throughout the center have been very supportive and very helpful, and it's only proper to acknowledge their role. Lastly, my hard-working and occasionally long-suffering staff. Michael Kugelman. Michael, raise your hand, please. Michael's in the back of the room, and he, more than anyone else, is responsible for putting this conference today, putting it together. I don't see Sue. Is Sue Levinston here? Well, Sue's right outside the door. Thank her when you go out. And then Miriam Hock. Miriam, raise your hand. Miriam just joined us a couple weeks ago, but was thrown into the deep end and has been most helpful in getting us going today. Those of you who have been in managerial positions understand that it's the staff that always does the heavy lifting in getting these things going, and I'm immensely grateful to them. Okay, we have a full day. I want to get out of your way so you can hear the people you've come to hear. When we were casting around for a speaker to get us started, one name kept popping up again and again, and that is the name of Zephyr Altough. I assume and hope that each of you picked up a copy of all the biographies on the table as you came into the room. So I'm not going to give you his full biography. I'm simply going to mention one or two key points. He has, as you will have seen if you read the biography, an immensely rich range of experiences in working on food and agricultural issues in Pakistan. He is presently, but also for the third time, chairman of the Pakistan Agricultural Research Council. He has been agricultural secretary for the federal government. He has been chief economist and agricultural secretary for the Punjab provincial government. He is quite simply one of the leading agricultural experts, not simply in Pakistan, but throughout the world. So Zafar Altough, I welcome you to the podium. I thank you for joining us, and we're eager to hear your comments.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for these kind words also. When this information came through, ladies and gentlemen, I decided that we needed something different for you to get by, because I read names of people who have quantified poverty and food security pretty strongly in Pakistan. On the way, while we are discussing these issues, I'll be talking about the unintended consequences of certain policy matters, both from the Green Revolution side and from the Pakistan government side. But however you might look at Pakistan, I think Bob has already mentioned that and he's raised it as a hypothetical question, that there is a problem when food security is not guaranteed to people of Pakistan. Then all kinds of activities take place. So let me give you a view of the 4 provinces. I've titled it purposely as in a pluralistic society. I think it is immensely unfavorable to the people of Pakistan to lump them together and give you an aggregate situation for food security across the provinces. Balochistan, where a lot of insurgency is taking place, is 44% of Pakistan. Ironically, its budget is less than the Capital Development Authority's budget in Islamabad. For 44% of the area, and for people who are in the extreme areas, extremely difficult areas, food security is non-existent. Sindh and Punjab are the 2 irrigated provinces, with some irrigation in northwest frontier province. Gilgit, of course, is a special area which is not a part of the province. But these are areas I will refer to as adjuncts to Pakistan. These and the areas of Azad Kashmir, Jammu and Azad Kashmir. But please fix these provincial boundaries to your mind. 65% of the population live in Punjab, and only very minimal, about 11% live in Balochistan. NWFB and Sindh, of course, make up the balance, 17 and 23%. But, however you might like to take on food security in the country, you're going to have a problem of distribution because Pakistan is like a tail and the infrastructure is not very well organized. These are the areas where there's conflict at the moment. These areas have been neglected for a long time. They are roughly 10% of the area of Pakistan. So I decided I'll show you how these areas are. And some of these names are pretty familiar to you because they've been cropping up in various law and order situations and border wars that is going on against terrorism. These areas have been neglected for the past 60, 65 years. So you can understand the difficulty that Pakistan is encountering in respect to these areas. To give you the cultural context, in NWFP, these are some of the major tribes. There are other sub-tribes as well. Balochistan has two belts. It has a Baloch belt as well as a Pashtun belt. So that you have these kinds of conflicts which are there. In the Punjab and in the Sindh, there is a caste system which is going on. And it's not the same as India, but it's not hierarchically organized. It is basically a functional caste system. Irrigated areas of Sindh and Punjab, and has been mentioned that these are the areas which provide the surplus wheat to the rest of the areas. The marginal areas requirement is totally different. And in my context, when I speak on marginal areas, I speak of no land which is not cultivable and no water which is not usable. So I purposely provoke these kind of sentences so that people understand that you can get by with marginal water and you can get by fragile and marginal lands as well. 60 to 70% of population is in rural areas, and I'll focus mostly on the rural areas. The balance is in urban areas. There has been some dispute whether it is 30%, 32% or what. But it's a two-way street. You must realize that people keep on coming in and out of rural and urban areas. There are 13 ecological zones, 27 sub-ecological zones. So, and with those ecological zones, there are mindset variations which have to be understood. We've had recently, because of the border wars, we've had two difficulties with the small ruminants, the goat and sheep ruminants, because these are normally animals which move with the snow line. And the Afghans used to come into Pakistan and then go back into Afghanistan when the summer was there. So you have a problem with the transhuman populations, and this used to provide about 35% of the urban protein requirement. Investment in rural areas is negligible, and I keep on telling people in Pakistan that the villages only have a graveyard and a mosque. So if they die, it is the will of God, and if they live, they go and say their prayers in the mosque. The infrastructure is immature. No matter which way you look at the infrastructure, whether you look at the educational system, the social action programs that have been developed, they are immature in the sense that you and I will never send our children to those schools, we'll never have our health facilities organized in those areas. So you have a certain amount of discrepancy so far as social values are concerned. The future scenario, 2020, Pakistan will be the 5th largest in the world. Well, we have always thought of primary food security. We've never looked at secondary food security. The areas in the periphery, the areas where water is less, the areas which are not developed, the areas which are not irrigated, the areas which are dependent on rainfall, have always gone in for maize, sorghum, and millets. Now, one of the unintended consequences of the Consolidated Group on International Agriculture Research, the wheat and maize station based in Mexico, was that the entire focus was shifted to wheat, with the result that we had in one province 37 breeders of wheat, in another we had 11 breeders of wheat, and another 6, but we lost out all the breeders that were in maize, that was in sorghum, that were in millets. So the natural consequence of that was that the productivity elements in those areas, in those crops, was lost. And as a result, there were biases and resource use consequences which are indicated in the social systems at the moment. 93% of these, as a result, 93% of all our resources, which is land, research, and finance, has been spent on 4 crops: wheat, rice, cotton, and sugarcane. And understandably, in cotton and sugarcane, which are the cash crops, they have developed mafias which rule the world in Pakistan. The gravity of issues wheat will not deliver. Gentlemen, ladies, take it from me, wheat will not deliver across the country. There are other options, and I've mentioned those other options. In the frontier, the major food security crop is maize. In Balochistan, it can be anything. It can be millet, sorghum, or maize, or a mixture of all three. And unfortunately, what has happened as a result of 60 years of, or 50 years of CGIAR efforts, good efforts in their own right, has been that wheat fixes the cropping pattern. It takes away 50-55% of the area. If you value these interventions in the other areas, then about out of 8.7 or 8.8 million hectares of land, roughly 3 million hectares of land, even in the irrigated areas of Punjab and Sindh, produce less than 0.6 tons per hectare. So it's marginal, it's very marginal, because wheat is the basic consumption in this area. They have to leapfrog to new productivity dimensions, and those new productivity dimensions means that you have to start looking at land resources and cropping interventions in a different way altogether. We are doing that at this moment. Wheat is considered, as a result of the tremendous amount of action on these issues, wheat has always been considered as the primary food security element. And therefore, a lot of time the government of Pakistan is involved in food security problems based on wheat, without realizing that the distributional element is that much more difficult. And if you go back to the map which I asked you to keep in your mind, there being no infrastructure in the Balochistan area, in the frontier area, in the marginal areas, with the result that the differential in wheat prices could be anything between 50 to 60% between the urban areas of Punjab and Sindh and the rural marginal areas of Balochistan and frontier. There are weaknesses in decision making, and those weaknesses have led to natural resources depletion. One of the areas where a lot of natural resource depletion has taken place is in water. And since water is considered the elixir of life, power structures are such that they take away major water irrespective of whether they are efficient in its use or not. The efficiency of the water system at the moment is about 27%. The efficiency of the fertilizer system, especially in nitrogen, varies between 20 to 25. In some areas, it's gone down to 5% as well. This is because of the consistent use of chemical fertilizers. Elitism in the system affects the use of natural resources, and it has led to one very important element, which is the demise of hope. Now, if you look at the agrarian system in Pakistan, then the farmers were given lease from colonial times, and those leases used to be increased by an increase of ₹1, which is a couple of cents per year. And that was a system which was going on. But over the years, what has happened is that the elites have taken away those lands from the poor. Whereas the elites' yield was about 2.9 tons. The yield of the non-elites' yield was about 2.9 tons per hectare. The yields of the elites is only about 0.9 tons per hectare. They were not there in agriculture. They didn't know the agriculture systems as such. Two provinces, and rightly pointed out, are the main producers, but there are only 11 districts out of 121 which are surplus. Now, Balochistan and NWFP areas of war could have been better off if we had looked at productivity in different terms. In Balochistan, Chaghi, which is one of the districts, is larger than the Northwest Frontier Province and has 4.5 million hectares of land available for wheat. Now, the current culture says that there is no water there. There is water there, and it is at a depth of 60 to 90 feet. And it is served, the recharge is served by a river which goes into Afghanistan and then comes back into Pakistan. Now, this is 4.5 million hectares of land. It is unexplainable, despite a lot of projects that have come up, why this land has not been put to wheat and to agriculture production. That would have meant to the existing 22.97 million hectares of land, you would have added another 4.5 million hectares of land, and that would have added to the food security. and would have taken away the problems which distributional effects have in Balochistan. The urbanization policies impact on the rural areas. They impact in two ways. A, the cake is that much. It is not unlimited. So when you take away resources away from away to the urban areas, you reduce that much investment in the rural areas. And the second is that the pollution that comes up with those investments are having a deleterious effect on the productive systems. The canal systems and the river systems are now sinks for the industrial pollution that comes into the system. Adequacy and access for urban areas is difficult to understand. There is adequacy this year. As against the requirement of 23.5 million tons, we've produced about 32 million tons. We have an immediate problem with the surplus. We don't know how to store it because our storage is not there. We have never invested in storage, number one. Number two, if this is adequate, it is at a price. The support price for this was extremely high, with the result that A, there will be difficulties for people in Balochistan to have a physical access, quantum access to this quantity of wheat, and price. Both are difficult. Both will be more expensive. The wheat price will jump up by about 25 to 30% this year. The impact of this inflation, and wheat has a very strong backing on inflation, leaves the farmer in a bad way. This year, because the price was nice and the productivity was there, what has happened as a result thereof is that because of increase in wheat price, support price, and Pakistan follows a support price system in wheat, the area under fodder has reduced. Now, when you reduce the fodder area, then you take away feed and fodder which is meant for large ruminants and small ruminants, which, by the way, act as a bank and as insurance for the farmers of that area. 3 wheat crops. I'm going to talk of 3 cropping patterns and show you what has happened over there. Wheat rice, cotton wheat, and mixed cropping systems. This is the consequence of 50 to 60 years of CGR interventions. The rainfall of the 22.97 million hectares of land, roughly 6 million hectares of land is without irrigated agriculture. It's rainfall agriculture, and that is erratic. This year, the rainfall has been excellent, and it has come almost as if the Almighty wanted it to come at the right time. There are demand and supply imbalances. Cotton wheat surpluses area are also the least populated. Quality farmers are found in this area. Cotton takes the farmer to a different level of quality production. The mixed cropping pattern is the deficit area. So is the rice wheat area. The irony in the rice wheat area is that there have been 40 years of international experience and work on the rice wheat area. Our rice is grown with standing water. Now we are experimenting with no standing water in rice because we are short of water. Water stands in the rice fields only for the purpose of killing weeds. There is no other purpose. So if you have another option on killing weeds, you can always do away with standing water in the field. And therefore, what we intend to do is to do this project on roughly 60,000 hectares of land, 30,000 in Punjab and 30,000 in Sindh, which is the major growing areas, and to show it to the farmers that you don't need standing water. The demonstrative effect should be good enough. And we put our own jobs on the line by saying that we will double the productivity as well, with the same kind of resource inputs as we have done in the past where water was standing. The access issues, deficit areas have poor infrastructure. There are no infrastructure. The infrastructure in Islamabad, if you go to Islamabad, is excellent. You will never get a bump on a vehicle. It's a rich response in the area. But the movement difficulties in the rural areas are because of governance issues which we've had. We've never looked at the planning system to meet the shortfall of those areas in terms of equity, efficiency, and efficacy. Poverty is a two-way street. People keep coming into it and people keep getting out of it, and it's not necessary that once you've got out of poverty, you will stay out of poverty. You can, by virtue of the various resources that you have, you can come in and out of poverty. The income ironically, is limited by absence of markets. Agriculture markets in the Punjab, which was the largest agriculture province, was 650 in 1947. Today it has been reduced to 121. And ironically, in Islamabad, which is for urban-based people, there are 104 markets available to them for urban products. Each sector has about 5 markets, 1 major market and 4 smaller markets, plus a number of other markets which have cropped up. So we are looking at urban biases in the agriculture country. This is how the income and expenditure estimates. This is a recent survey. This is not available with anybody at the moment. It is for characteristics of farmers with less than 2 hectares of land. We've looked at the income and expenditure systems, and we see that this is how the characteristics are. Most of the animals, livestock are with the rice wheat farmers and in the mixed zone farmers in Sindh. Sindh has its own peculiarities. Sindh doesn't have a village as such. Punjab has villages which can be up to 4,000 to 5,000 households. In Sindh, the villages are about 8 to 9 households. They're called goats. So you have small villages, small towns in Punjab, villages that have become small towns. But in the Sindh province, there are no villages as such. There are only 8 or 10 households which are joined together. We've looked at the net income from this, and you will see that the net income in US dollars is given in colors. The others are in rupees. And you will see that food share in the Punjab is 68%. In cotton wheat it is 72%, and in mixed zone it is 78%. So food predominates from agriculture incomes. In the rice wheat system, in Sindh, 87%, 66%, and 61% of the 3 cropping patterns that we showed you. With the result that there is very little left for interventions on the social side. You don't have enough income to spend on other things, and if you become sick, you had it. This is a 6-month scenario which we just had completed for this particular speech that I'm giving to you today. Spot price increases in wheat has provided some relief to small farmers. And the relief is that their food security has increased by 1 to 2 more months. They've got enough wheat for another 2 months. But they still have to buy wheat after exhausting income from wheat and livestock sources. Pakistan, the farmer has generally 2 crops to bear and 2 income sources. One, every 6 months, you either have a wheat crop or a rice crop or a cotton crop and a sugarcane crop, which provides you the money. You need, for food security, you need to have on sustainable basis diversified food security. You need to have various ways of doing poultry, fruit, vegetable gardening, and goat farming. And I'll show you why that is necessary. Income deficits are affecting negatively on the other crops. Reduction in cost and productivity increases could also provide further relief to wheat growers. How do you reduce the cost? This year, the fertilizer cost went up by over 200% in diammonium phosphate, which is DAP. So we started looking at different factor inputs, and we found, and we had results in rainfall agriculture to show to the farmers that with the reduced costs, significant reduced costs, you could still get 5.5 tons of wheat from your cropping pattern. Rural agriculture incomes, this is a World Bank study, so I can't say much about it, but I thought I'd show it to you. This is how it looks like, household incomes and sources that the World Bank has brought about. Let me talk to you on persons employed in rural non-agriculture sector. These are definitions which are urban definitions. There is no, when they talk of the services sector having 22.7%, it means that those people are employed in non-skilled working, mostly as page boys or whatever. They don't have any skills as such. The transportation is very minimal. You can have a look at the system. Construction is, of course, basic, very basic. There are no urban brick-built houses in the Punjab or Sindh. They are in the frontier, and that was because of the drug trade earlier on in the 70s and 80s. Across zones and farm zones, we have, this is the poverty incidence. Now these are figures at which Sohail is very good. These are from the economic survey, and they have been coupled with the household income and expenditure surveys that we had in Pakistan. But it shows that the figure in the rice wheat system in Sindh is about 57%. That is the level for farmers less than 1 hectares. And what is the agrarian system? The agrarian system is that there are 93% farmers with less than 12.5 acres, and of those, 60% are less than 3 hectares. There are people with less than 1 hectare as well. So you see that we have looked at above 5 hectares, up to 5 hectares, we see that the poverty element is immense. And of course, you don't explain how the poverty factor in Sindh is, in rice wheat system, is about 59.2% in the 2 to 5 hectares category. These are details, and these details will keep on shifting with how good a year you have and how bad a year you have. The poverty, we looked at, as I said, we looked at 5 different aspects, or 5 or 6 different aspects, and we wanted to give you these figures, which were the required figures for food security and nutrition elements. And I'll show you what this data shows to you. The recommended dietary allowances that were shown to you in the last, over here, we see that major macronutrients, energy and protein, and I'll show you the slides afterwards, they are adequate in consumption, but micronutrients consumed at low levels, iron, calcium, vitamin A, etc., and all the vitamins, there is severe deficiency in vitamin A. And any doctor will tell you what the impact of that will be on the human health and human factor, which could lead to productivity or elsewhere. A recent survey, we are unable to go to the war zones. This survey was conducted, if you go back to the map of Pakistan and the second slide, which showed you the war zone, we didn't go into the war zone, that was very dangerous, so we worked in the other zone areas, and this survey is from there. It is prevalent in deserts, food security across regions, in deserts, low intensity areas, fragile and marginal areas. Now my contention is that in fragile and marginal areas, if you bring in policy issues, the income can be more than the irrigated and agriculture in Punjab and Sindh. And that might seem slightly provocative, but it is true nevertheless. And we'll see how we have done that in the past. Landless and small farmers, there's a 37% shortage. Energy deficit areas, frontier districts. How am I doing for time?
Well, you're doing fine.
All right. Mafia-led greed, major hurdles in corporate sector. Mafia is a very strong element. There are about 8 mafias you fight in Pakistan all the time. And they are rich. And they are few. And you have occasionally cartelization, and that cartelization has impacted on the poor pretty adversely. Protein intake, of course, is higher than recommended dietary allowance. Marginal deficiencies in desert ecologies. Now in desert ecologies, it's interesting, Pakistan has hot deserts as well as cold deserts. And any water can be usable in desert ecologies. There's no bad water. We've grown a plant, edible oil plant, saliconia, with seawater on desert ecologies. So you can be as provocative as you want to be. Vitamins, iron deficiency is 24% below the recommended dietary allowance. There's a massive effect. Across zones, it's 18 to 24%. Calcium deficit, 4%, but maximum in desert ecologies is 48%. Vitamin A, 85%. And in all cropping zones, diets rich in vitamin A, expensive, are not within the reach of population. Edible oil, eggs, fruits, etc. It is the way we are organized. It need not be so. And then the question arises, what have you been doing? What have I been doing in this area? And we have, on a personal note, a lot of things. Conceptually, Pakistan's governance issues have emerged from the decision-making of the elites. There's a mindset. If you go back to 1958, there have been very limited periods of democratically elected government. It has been authoritarian, and authoritarian government decision-making is more self-oriented than otherwise. We have yet to learn what equity is, what efficiency is. You can't live with water efficiency at 27% and you can't live with fertilizer efficiency at less than 20%. It means that there's something basically wrong. And if you clear these first two issues, then you can go to efficacious issues in which you take things as crop per drop basis. Productivity limits, there are no limits to productivity. The limits are the brains and the minds of people over there. Can the West help? Yes. Knowledge-wise, they can help. You can't look at commodities anymore, you've got to look at products. And if maize can have 27 products, we need a process engineer to do that. We need a biomol, a biochemist, a molecular biologist, both in one, to work out the enzymes, work out the proteins, and to separate them through a process engineer. So, you've got to be, in knowledge generation, very iconoclastic. You cannot live with routine actions and routine things. The research council which I had, I looked at the 147 PhDs that we have. 34 ran away to the United States and Canada. Of those 147, 117 are over 55. So it's geriatric all the way.
Watch that.
I'm including myself, Bob. But you can be young at 60, at 70, and you can be old at 30. It depends on your work ethics. So besides a PhD, you need a work ethics system to work in the country. Factor inputs change? Yes, it's possible. How would you like me to explain to you that when we change the factor input from chemical agriculture to organic agriculture, the ratio of productivity increases in price terms between organic and others was 1:20. It just goes to show what can be done. Institutional changes you require. If 93% of your farmers are small farmers and 60% of them are less than 3 hectares, and the resource base is bad, and the resource base needs a shift, then you look for the best people that are available in the world and induce those institutional changes. You cannot live with 19th century institutions in the 21st century. You've got to look at a change in mind structure. You've got to develop a mind for the 21st century. It's a tall order. There are changes in infrastructure, but the more important changes are in social and economic sectors. These are not concrete structures. You've got to have building blocks of a different kind altogether. In policy issues, opportunities are immense. But if you have policy issues which are run-of-the-mill, that's it. You have to meet farmer shortfalls. Resource allocative efficiency, the Planning Commission is now desk-bound and Islamabad-bound. It is not bound to the areas where I'm talking about. Targeted transformations are necessary. There are a number of targeted transformations. Research, fortunately, is not only site-specific, it is also person-specific in Pakistan. It is not institutional-specific, it is person-specific. It depends on what kind of people you have, what are the work ethics of those people, and how you make them do that work, how you allow them to turn their failures into success. It can't be otherwise. And decision-making in agriculture, research in agriculture, seems to suffer from Professor Wilson's word, consiliency. The decisions are elsewhere. The decisions are not in agriculture. The decisions are with anybody who is in power structure, anybody who is in the Planning Commission, anybody who is in the Finance Ministry. So you have to look at these kinds of power structures quite seriously. You have to remove hurdles and rely on the genius of the people to find a solution. We've done this in the past with a lot of success. The micro-interventions do affect macro-interventions. I've already talked of the mafia and its detrimental role. I can name the number of people on the tips of my hand who are taking benefits out of the entire resource sector of the country. The issues are severe when you look at profit versus greed. In the Pakistan system, you cannot have a chief executive take away 2.6 million rupees as his monthly salary. when the rest of the salary is in thousands. You can't have the banking system take away 110 million rupees as bonus money for job well done. It's not done anywhere in the world. And in Pakistan, it should never have been done. But these are difficult people to handle because they have a lot of power structure. I've already mentioned that you have to shift from commodities to products. So far, all food security elements have been looked at in terms of commodities rather than products. Asset-based poverty can be overcome by fair and prudent policies. That's a large menu that I'm giving you, but it is possible. The powerful structure, they are articulate, and they are in interaction with powers elsewhere. You can make a guess. Poverty is a Pakistani product. It can be massively improved. There are multiple pathways, which means that you have to bring in imaginative interventions, and the policymaker has to learn to walk a tightrope. I've already talked to you of the 21st century mind. You have to change the existing minds. It's difficult. It's possible. The demonstration effect of the democratically elected is important. We have a democratically elected government. We think there's a different change between the autocratic government of the past and the democratic government of the present. And let me add, in the end, by our omnibus section, that anything and everything is possible. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all.
Very nice. Well, Zafar, that was just as rich, just as stimulating as we had hoped for, and we thank you. Let me particularly thank you for concluding on a positive note. I think when we look at these issues, and unfortunately not just this issue, but a whole range of challenges confronting Pakistan, it's easy to be overwhelmed by the magnitude of the difficulties. So I was particularly grateful for you suggesting there are a number of reasons to be encouraged. Let me start off by asking you a question, and then we'll turn to others in the room. If you were able to snap your fingers and ensure that one particular thing could be done that would help Pakistanis deal with this range, this complex of problems, what would it be? What's the single one biggest problem you would like to see resolved?
I think food security is going to be dependent on Balochistan in the future. And that's where I would go. And what that would do is, that would prove to the people of Pakistan that anything is possible in that area.
Good. Thank you. Okay. If you'll raise your hand, I'll call on you. If you'll wait until we get a microphone to you, introduce yourself, and then we'll go. The woman 3/4 of the way back in white. Yes.
Two or three things which have come up very seriously in the CGIAR, and I've been a member of the CGIAR group for a number of years. One, that you can't have the same interventions in agriculture which you have decided in the year 1960. You've got to change. That's one. They have not been able to change. They have stayed on with wheat, rice, and that's it. In maize, they've gone in for productivity elements, but in maize we looked at Pioneer in Iowa, and we took Pioneer over there, and they've been able to increase the productivity. So the point I'm making is that you can't have an old man's club in the CGIAR anymore. You've got to change it. You've got to see new interventions. You've got to work it out on the basis of natural resource bases that are available in the country. Now in rice, they only look at Erie rice. the interventions that I have suggested have come from a priest in Mozambique. It's not our work. God's man in Mozambique gave us this intervention, and it's going to change things. Now, if you're going to look at traditional ways of doing things, and if CGIAR is not going to look at... There was a time when I was on the CGIAR, and they went around the world looking for, especially Simit and May's program, they went around looking at people who were not to be given routine work. They were supposed to look 20 years hence. Those kinds of persons are no longer in the CGIAR. So whatever you want to do in the CGIAR, you can't have more of the same continuously. You've got to change. And that's the change one is looking for. The International Water Management Institute, I have been their chairman for about 11 years. It doesn't move. Why doesn't it move? It has to look at better utilization of water. And that has not been done by them. They've looked at basin irrigations and other irrigations, but they've not looked at micro irrigations at the farmer's level.
Yes.
Good morning. Christy Chabai with Save the Children, and I'm wondering if you would comment on the future of cotton in Pakistan.
Sorry, on cotton in Pakistan?
Cotton, future of cotton.
Cotton will remain in Pakistan. Why? Because it works against it's the biggest mafia. The textile industry is the biggest mafia in Pakistan. Normally you would have said in economics that if you had a number of buyers, there would be competition amongst them. Despite the fact that there are 600 of these textile mills, there's no competition amongst them. They are closed shop, they work things out themselves. Cotton will come in, but cotton of a different kind will have to come in. We are now looking at not the open pollinated varieties, but the hybrid varieties. And there are two emerging trends in the hybrid variety. One Bt gene will take you for an 11-month crop, which means that 3.5 million hectares of land will go out of cotton, out of wheat production, because it's an 11-month crop. The other is a 5.5-month crop. The yield of one is, the first one I mentioned is about 10 tons per hectare. The yield of the other is 8 tons per hectare. As policy makers, they have to decide. Now, who will decide? The textile mill owners will decide. They have decided to give to one multinational a subsidy of $180 million per year for an 11-month crop. It doesn't work. It can't work because you're going to take away 3.5 million hectares of land out of agriculture, out of wheat production, number one. Number two, you've already had a debacle because of the elites in the country. They've taken away 2.97 million hectares of land to urban housing. Not for the poor, but for the rich. So you have a 6 million hectares of debacle of that, and you have 6 million hectares of land under water logging and salinity, which is marginal productivity. So if you are, cotton is going to be a cash crop for a long time to come. Farmers will go in for a crop. They will go in for the first year with the 10 tons per hectare crop, which is an 11-month crop. But then I think competition will come in and they will have to go back to the 5.5-month crop. But cotton is going to be there. It's going to be because the mafia desires so, and cotton is also a sensible crop for Balochistan. And that is where there's no pesticide spray at all. So you can work out your systems over there.
Zafar, let me press you on this point simply so we understand what you mean when you use the term mafia. Mafia frequently conjures up images of gangsters and criminals. You might also think of it in terms of a self-interested cartel. Can you help us understand exactly what you mean when you use that term?
They don't have any guns anymore. This is a mafia which is much more lethal because they will not do anything which is not in their self-interest. And they can influence policy. Let me tell you of the textile mafia. The textile mafia, as I said, first we used to have a joint secretary, a senior position in the industries ministry. Then the mafia wanted a separate textile ministry, they got it. Then they wanted a separate textile town, they got it. Then they wanted a separate kind of support for the cotton crop, they got it. and they controlled the price. They would not let any export go through to the farm. In one case, we did e-commerce, and this is personally which happened to us. The cotton textile mill was giving them 39 cents to a pound of cotton, raw cotton. We got an offer on e-commerce at 63 cents to a pound. The president chose to accept the 39 cents to a pound rather than the 63 cents to a pound, which meant that the farmer's income was lost, number one. Number two, they said, when the man came in on the e-commerce system, he said, we'll buy your cotton waste at 83 cents. I said, it doesn't make any sense. You're buying A-quality cotton at 63 cents, and you're buying cotton waste at 83 cents. And he said, it makes sense, because as long as there are wars going on, we will be making gunpowder out of this waste material. So who determines the ways of the textile mafia? The mafia is really a group of people who will not allow liberal economics to work. Let me put it that way. They are economically and financially and politically very powerful.
Thank you. Back in the back.
So much, Dr. Altaf, for a very powerful presentation. My name is Roshan, and I represent United States Department of Agriculture. And Dr. Rexroad is also here with me. He's in a very senior leadership position of USDA. Just a background that USDA has a memorandum of understanding with government of Pakistan on science and technology collaboration. Things have been moving forward very rapidly, but lately things have really kind of slowed down. With the new leadership, what do you think is your vision in terms of priority areas which you, as the chair of ERC, that is looking forward to collaborate with the United States Department of Agriculture in the next few years?
We lost your microphone, Dr. Qureshi. The question was, for those who were unable to hear it, with the new leadership, and I assume you mean in Pakistan, what are the priorities, particularly in the way of cooperation with U.S. and U.S. Department of Agriculture?
Yes. The new political leadership is entirely oriented towards agriculture and rural sector. And their priorities are A, water, B, they want knowledge generation in agriculture, for which USDA is coming in a very big way. They want to intervene in the major productive sectors in agriculture with the help of USA. And if you recall, I was here when the last government was here in the USA, and again with this government here, and I made this point to Mr. Negroponte that we want knowledge generation in agriculture. We wanted to twin with the universities in USA, and they agreed. They accepted that point of view. Why do we want to twin with the universities? Because we wanted to have major knowledge generation in Pakistan. In the last meeting that we had over here, which was about a month ago, we talked of water, we talked of other productive sectors in agriculture. But it's an all-encompassing thing, with the result that there is a lot of flexibility allowed by the USA, by the USDA in the system, with the result that if we can suggest to them what is required. For instance, they were looking at stem rust, and they were looking at UG99 in wheat, which is a major requirement if food security is to be maintained. So USDA wanted to have it here. We said, why don't you have it? We have a first-class research center which is doing work on stem rust and on UG99. And we've just heard from them that they are willing to get India, Afghanistan, and other countries of South Asia to come to Islamabad to do the work over there. So it's a two-way sort of situation. Wherever we can, we have any strength, they would like to play with us. Wherever, and I must say, USAID and USDA both, wherever I have suggested some intervention, they've always looked at it positively. So the sky is the limit. We've also asked for some help in biomols, biochemist and molecular biologist, plus process engineers. So these are typical things which we want to take into the system so that we can work it out economically to the betterment of the people. It's more on products now, not on commodities. That's the shift that we are talking about. And of course, water efficiency comes in a big way. Thank you.
In the back, all the way in the back. And a former fellow of the Wilson Center. Welcome back.
You spoke very eloquently about moving hurdles, relying on the genius of the people to find solutions, and indicated that Pakistan has done this in the past. So I'd like to ask you how you are involving farmers in some of the research and planning. What kind of participatory approaches was this being in Pakistan?
I think the most neglected area was the work with Pakistani farmers. Basically because this was held to be a provincial subject. We will not talk in terms of extension agents or whatever. What we are now doing is we are looking at master craftsmen, a good farmer wherever he is. For instance, I forgot to mention that the poorest district in Sindh was the president's own district, Nawab Shah. He should sort of drown himself, you know. It's the poorest district in the entire province of Sindh. And what we've done over there is we've looked at master craftswomen or master craftsmen who go to schools. The children of the farmers that are there, they are taught specific skills. For instance, how to look after an animal, how to take the productivity factors forward. Plus, we are starting 3 farmer schools straight away. We used to have field assistant schools, but never farmer schools. We are now starting 3 farmer schools where we will be working. But that is not to say that we do not go otherwise and talk to the farmers on these issues. Dependent on the fact as to how mobile an individual is, policymaker is in the rural areas, he can do his bit. One of the options which came to me now, despite the fact that we produced a lot of wheat this year, the farmers in Multan said we do not want to produce wheat next year, we want to produce oilseeds next year. And since you had helped us last time, why don't you come in this year? So I went, met them, about 1,000 of them, and talked to them of how we will help them out. The point is, the farmer is receptive. But if you do not go to him, how can knowledge go to him? Knowledge has to go to him. He's not going to come to you in the cities. He's unable to make the city route anymore. The irony is that we are most urban-based organizations. But this year we've done quite a bit. We'll probably open up more farmer schools also. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Right here in the middle. We're having a little bit of problem with the microphones. Neither one of them work, Michael? Okay, then since not only people in the room want to hear you, but also people in the webcast, if you'll just project your voice.
Yeah, Chris DeAngelis from the U.S. Trade Representative's Office. I'm just wondering, we talked a lot about the problems domestically with agriculture in Pakistan, what you need to resolve. I'm wondering what role developing additional income for farmers by international trade, some products that Pakistani farmers might produce and send to Europe or the United States or maybe some closer places, Middle East.
Yep.
What are the obstacles to developing more of that?
2 crops in my last tenure which we started. One was saliconia, which was also a biofuel, if you look at it that way. And the other was sea buckthorn, which is hippophae, which is a product of northern areas, the hilly areas. It's growing wild over there. We domesticated it. We used it. What are the products out of hippophae? The products out of hippophae were first champagne. We could export that. The next was medicine for hepatitis C, and we tested it along the medical grounds. And instead of having 82 injections, vaccine injections, you could be cured for a few dollars with it. It's natural, normal. It's also a cancer relieving drug. What was the obstacle? Both these projects were stopped by the President of Pakistan, the last President of Pakistan. He had been fed. Now, both these areas are areas where farmers would have gained immensely and the product would have been unique and would have gone into international market. Now, if you look at Salicornia, you grow it with seawater, which is immensely available, and you have a 700-kilometer coastline. And you know where I got the seeds from? From a man in Arizona who was called Wood Prince, who had something to do with astronauts and what have you. So I gave him a call and I said, Mr. Wood Prince, can you come over to Pakistan? He took the next flight, came over to Pakistan. He was 82 years of age at that time and suffering from gout. And he gave us 50 tons of that seed. That seed is not locatable now. The irony of it is, here's a man who was 82 years of age, who responded to a call, came over, and the President of Pakistan just blocked those two projects. The President of Pakistan, the last President of Pakistan, was a very powerful man. Yes, he gave the reason. He said the man who started these projects was anti-Pakistani. That is me.
Over here, yes, and please remember to speak loudly.
Stu Allison, I'm an economist with USA. Dr. Altaf, appreciate your comments. On one of your slides, you had policy issues, and you skipped over that fairly quickly.
How did I?
I'd be interested to hear you expand a little bit about policy issues, particularly since the policies, as I understand them, in agriculture in Pakistan give the government much more control over marketing and prices and all sorts of things than they do in most countries which are more successful in developing agriculture. Particularly, you mentioned the price subsidy thing, which is sometimes too low, sometimes too high. When I was there a year ago, half of the production of wheat, for example, was thought to be outside government channels because it was on the so-called black market because the export rate was too low. You criminalized the storage of wheat more than 2 weeks. You mentioned that there's no storage capacity now that you have a bumper crop. This is precisely, I think, because the private sector has been discouraged from investing in storage capacity. The provinces control local markets and prohibit the transport of wheat from a surplus
That's right.
a more needy district. All sorts of policies in a sector which, by its nature, should be the most competitive sector of the country. I'd like for you to expand on what the current situation is and whether this is likely to change in the near future.
I could write a book on that. But to be very brief on policy issues, all policy issues have to look at things that are being done at the moment which can be done better in the future, number one. So you look at things differently by regions, not as an aggregate for a country. You have to take the provinces along with you, which is a difficult situation. Policy issues do not mean that you just look at the production of certain goods and certain systems. It also means that you look at the welfare of the people of that area. And that policy issue is important. Now, if I have given you two arguments, that according to the colonial system, and I didn't mention this, according to the colonial system, markets, agriculture markets, wholesale agriculture markets can only be in the public sector, not in the private sector. That's because 121 market mafia people will not allow markets to come up. The farm to market prices of products which are not governed by systems is this way. The producer gets 29%. The middleman, the mafia man, he gets 49%. 11% are the transaction costs and 11% is the profit of the retailer. Now, he's not willing to let loose of that 49% that he has with him. And the other irony is it's a closed shop. only a middleman's son can be a middleman. So when he dies, his son will step into his shoes. Now, despite our 10 years of efforts, 10 to 12 years of efforts, this thing has not changed. It is still continuing. It will continue because those people are providing resources to the political system for running the government. The Balochistan has, with 44% of the area, has only about 3 agriculture markets. How can productivity increase if the farmer produces something and he can't sell it? So you've got to bring in reforms which are, now in the Sindh, for instance, there are 71 agriculture markets. 66 of them are manned by government servants who want to siphon off some resources for themselves. Only 5 are with the private sector, and those 5 have been in position since 1947, or their families have been in position. Now, how can you work in agriculture sector if the farmer produces something, he has to sell somewhere, and he can't go 100 miles to sell it, or 50 miles to sell it. The productivity factor, one basic element which is hindering the productivity factor is that there are no markets, with the result that the farmer is not induced to produce more than what he can for his own purpose. Policy issues, there's a whole range of policy issues. How do you get the irrigation sector to change its policies which were legislated in 1921? 1921. We are now in something different. In fact, if there was some law which was legislated in 1980 or 1990, I would still be against it because the compulsions have changed. And I didn't mention this, but water flows against the rules of gravity to the highest point. It does not follow the rules of gravity. It can be taken anywhere by the powerful political system. Now look at this irony, that where they dispensed with the small farmers, the power block, they had 3 new canals built in without any planning permission, and the sufferance went to Sindh. All the water that was supposed to go to Sindh has been taken away by these powerful elites. Now, how is policy perverted? They said, we will give you, to Balochistan, they said, we will give you a canal system. The canal system was to go through 600 miles of land. It started from the Punjab. It started from a particular point in the Punjab because then they could siphon off that water to the other areas. Instead, they got to reduce that canal to 320 miles by taking off from another area lower down. But then they would not have been able to take back water to their own lands themselves. Now, it requires massive understanding. Balochistan has still not got that water. This is about 1 million hectares of land which have got water, and I mentioned that they, instead of getting 29 mounds, 22.9 tons per hectare, they got 9 tons per hectare, 0.9 tons per hectare. Now, where this kind of massive criminal activity is going on, it's criminal activity because what you're doing is you're taking away the assets which belong to somebody else, and the law states, the tenancy law states there are 2 kinds of tenants in Pakistan. One is tenants at will, which are with the landlords and others, the feudal system. And the other was tenants, Marusi tenants. You could not touch their rights. Their rights have been done away with. Now, you were lucky. You had Thomas Jefferson in the beginning who did away with the entailing system. We didn't do away with the entailing system. The net result is that you have feudals still existing. You have Warren Hastings' permanent settlement system partially operating in Sindh province. So you have these kinds of, you have to understand the area to realize that policy issues are not according to the books normally written. The policy issues have to remove all activities which hinder productivity. And that's the omnibus answer to your question.
We have lots of hands, but unfortunately we have no time left. Zafar, I want to thank you for getting us off to a really terrific beginning. I apologize to those of you who I haven't been able to call on, but you'll have opportunity during the day both to grab Zafar in a side conversation as well as to get involved in a more formal way. Join me, if you will, now in expressing our appreciation to Zephyr Altough.